Cartethyia has just been announced to be coming in Wuthering Waves version 2.4, and as the Sentinel Resonator of Verguna, a lot of people are excited for her release. So I was thinking, what could Cartethyia's kit look like? Well, that's what this video is about. First of all, we have to establish what is Cartethyia's element and her weapon type. And unlike with Zani, I am really sure of this one. First off, let's talk about why she's definitely going to be an Aero character. No and ifs or buts about it. First of all, the sheer amount of characters that we have been getting for Aero recently, specifically for Aero Erosion. Okay, well, it's not actually that many, it's just 2 in a row, but it's still 2 in a row, trying to build up Aero Erosion as an archetype. We got Aero Rover as a healer who is capable of increasing the cap for Aero Erosion, and then we are getting Shikona this update, capable of applying Aero Erosion and amplifying its damage. So now all we still need is a DPS for Aero Erosion. But that role could be given to any character. Why is it going to be Cartethyiia specifically? Well, there's plenty of reasons. First of all, the Fleurdelys Echo. The Fleurdelys Echo does arrow damage and gives 10% arrow damage bonus just at a baseline, while giving an additional 10% to Aero Rover and a mystery character, who I believe is going to be Cartethyia. It only makes sense that Cartethyia is going to use the Fleurdelys Echo. An extra reason is that the Fleurdelys Echo is on an Aero set, so obviously the Aero boss is going to be on the Aero set and going to be used on the Aero character. Additionally, in the Curved Cube event, we have a Cartethyia cube that has a damaging skill, which is arrow damage. So everything is pointing to the fact that Cartethyia is going to be an Aero character. And then for her weapon type, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, this character is going to be a sword character. I'm sorry, she's just a sword character, there is no and ifs or buffs about it. Half of the 2.2 questline was about collecting the divine swords. Cartethyia herself talked about practicing with a sword. Her cube uses swords in the attack. The Fleurdelys boss uses swords in her attacks. Literally everything points to Cartethyia being a sword character. So let's be completely honest here, Cartethyia's Aero Sword. There is no ands, ifs, or buts, she's just an Aero Sword character, and I'm going to be running along with that assumption. Now, it's time to talk about the mechanics of Cartethyia's kit. I've already talked about why I believe she's going to be a DPS character. We have already multiple characters focused around Aero Erosion, so now we just need a DPS to exploit it. It's the same as Zani with Spectrofrazzle, although more so because we already have Phoebe as a Spectrofrazzle DPS. But Shikona isn't really a DPS, she just can't be one, which means we need a DPS. This also means that we get to look at Shikona's kit to see how Cartethyia is going to function. First of all, I want to talk about Fleurdelys. Fleurdelys is a part of Cartethyia, and I would really like to see Fleurdelys as a part of Cartethyia's playable kit. Because honestly, Fleurdelys just farmed so much aura, so that is going to be the biggest reason I would want her at least. So how would Fleurdelys be a part of Cartethyia's kit? I think it's pretty obvious that Cartethyia is going to be the primary character we play as. She's the one we run around with in the world, but Fleurdelys is the character who was strong. Fleurdelys was the power of the Sentinel Resonator, which means that there is a very high chance she is going to end up being used in combat, but in what way? I can see 3 possible scenarios. First of all is as a sort of summon, where Cartethyia and Fleurdelys are both on the field at the same time attacking the enemies, but Cartethyia is the character that you're controlling, kind of like the doppelganger that Virgil has in Devil May Cry 5. The second idea is that it just becomes a full-on transformation, where during something like, I don't know, Cartethyia's Forte or her Liberation, she transforms into Fleurdelys to do her damage. Or the final idea, there is a pretty good chance that we are going to see Cartethyia alternate between Cartethyia and Fleurdelys, depending on the situation. Maybe because Cartethyia is going to be an Aero Erosion character, we are going to play Cartethyia to apply Aero Erosion to enemies, and then we swap to Fleurdelys in order to deal our damage to enemies that have Aero Erosion on them. This could make her very dynamic and not super reliant on Shikona. Because while there is a very high chance Shikona is going to be Cartethyia's best in slot, there is no way they're going to make the Sentinel Resonator basically unplayable without another 5-star. So I am 100% expecting that Cartethyia is going to be capable of applying her own Aero Erosion for her own rotation, just that Shikona is a large damage upgrade. And speaking of large damage upgrades, If we run with this kit, there's a very high chance that the attacks while in Fleurdelys mode are going to count as Aero Erosion damage. We've already seen with Zani that Kuro is 100% capable of allowing a character to have their damage count as their respective DOT damage, with Zani's heavy slashes all counting as Spectrofrazzle damage. So there's a very high chance that whatever mode Cartethyia is going to use to do her damage is going to count as Aero Erosion. This still gives Shakona a very good reason for existing, while not making her entirely mandatory in order for the rotation to work. Because that would mean that half the time, aka in Fleurdelys mode, you will be benefiting from Shakona's buff, and the other half of the time you won't be, meaning you're not entirely locked into using Shakona. Another thing I wonder is how is Cartethyia going to synergize with Aero Rover? There's a pretty high chance that Kuro wants us to play these two characters together, given the fact that Aero Rover's existence comes from Cartethyia's power, as well as Aero Rover's signature echo being Fleurdelys, even if it's not exactly optimal on them. So how are they going to synergize? Well, for that we have to look at the primary thing that Aero Rover brings to the table, aka the increase to Aero Erosion cap. So how could Cartethyia possibly interact with the cap of Aero Erosion to make it so increasing its cap is going to be a worthwhile upgrade for Cartethyia? Well, there's multiple ways they could do it. For example, they could make it so Cartethyia applies a constant stream of Aero Erosion, and that the damage output of Aero Erosion itself is going to be a large contributor towards the team damage. For example, one way they could go about it is allowing Aero Erosion procs to crit based on Cartethyia's crit stats, with Cartethyia giving multiple buffs for Aero Erosion in the form of amplification or res reduction. This is kinda like Phoebe, but it would more so be in the form of a damage dealer, because Cartethyia would be constantly applying Aero Erosion while on the field, and an Aero Rover would be increasing its cap, which would be a large increase to Aero Erosion's damage output. Same thing for Shakona with her amplification. This makes perfect sense to me, but for some reason I feel like Kuro Games isn't going to go down this route. They really like their crit, and given the fact that the Gusts of Vulcan set gives arrow damage bonus, there's a very high chance that Cartethyia is still going to scale off of regular damage bonuses. So while I do think this pure Aero Erosion DPS idea would be a good one and would be very well balanced within the game's mechanics, I just don't think that's the route they're going to take. They're probably going to go with a generic crit DPS route. In which case, are they going to treat her more like Phoebe or more like Zani, where either you care about Aero Erosion being on the enemy, or you just deal Aero Erosion damage? If Cartethyia purely does Aero Erosion damage, there's not much of a point behind the increase of Aero Erosion's cap, meaning that I think that in that scenario, Aero Rover would not be that strong with Cartethyia. But if it's handled like Phoebe, where it's just, oh, Aero Erosion needs to be on the enemy, it's not even going to be that useful to have Aero Rover in your party either. So the only way I can see them balancing this is the damage increase gets higher the more Aero Erosion is on the enemy. But that would make Cartethyia less effective in multi-wave, because you would need to wait for Aero Erosion to stack up in order for Cartethyia to do her full damage. So honestly, I really don't know how they're going to treat this character. There's simply a lot of factors when it comes to trying to predict Cartethyia's kit. But what do you think of Cartethyia? Are you going to be pulling for her? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out a lot. If you have any questions, be sure to join my Discord, which is linked in the description. I'm pretty active in there, so if you ask me a question, there's a pretty good chance I'll answer it. But that'll be it from me. Peace.